I stopped at a red light on Merriman Avenue and counted $41 in my hand. Just $41. Enough for gas, enough for dinner for the two kids asleep in the back seat, nowhere near enough to bury a wife, and not nearly enough to keep me a normal human being for another single minute. I counted it a second time. Not because I thought the number would change, but because my hands needed something to do anything at all while the rest of me came quietly apart behind the wheel. The light stayed red. In the back seat, my older daughter, Wren, 3 years old, had woken up at some point. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking anything. She was just looking out the window with a new, careful kind of silence. The kind of silence a 3-year-old should never have to learn. And her little sister, Posey, 16 months, was still asleep. One cheek pressed against the strap of her car seat, completely unaware that this morning had just taken something from her she hadn't even gotten the chance to remember. This morning my wife was alive, and now I was sitting at a stoplight trying to convince myself that it had ever been true. That a few hours ago she'd been standing at the stove stirring a pot of oatmeal, barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, complaining that we were out of coffee again. I could still smell it. The oatmeal burning because afterward nobody turned off the burner. That's the detail I've never told anyone in 14 years. The kitchen still warm with the smell of a half-finished breakfast while the person who made it lay on the floor and never got up again. The light turned green and I realized I had no idea where to drive. My name is Marcus Halloran. I was 25 years old. I had a rented house in West Asheville with 17 days left on the lease. I had a job estimating flooring costs that paid $41,000 a year. I had 2 daughters who needed feeding every few hours and a grief so total it had stopped feeling like an emotion and started feeling like a load-bearing wall, the kind where if you pulled it out the whole building would come down. And I had exactly one clear thought in the middle of all of it. I needed to get my girls somewhere safe. So I drove to my parents' house. I will never forget my mother's face when she opened the door, saw my face and understood. She understood, and she still stepped out onto the porch instead of inviting me in. She kept a dish towel in her hands, folding it into a smaller square, and then a smaller one as if that were the single most important task in the world right then. Behind her, my father appeared in the doorway. He looked at me. He looked at my mother. He did not look toward the car where his 2 granddaughters were sitting, not once. By the time you understand why that money had nothing to do with anything that was about to happen, you'll also understand exactly what kind of person can stand in front of a door with their own 2 grandchildren on the other side of the step and still decide never to open it. So, let me take you back to the beginning. My wife's name was Delia Halloran, born Delia Caraway, and she came from a small horse and cattle place up in the mountains of Madison County north of here, where the fog sits down in the valleys, until almost noon. She was 28 years old. She died on a Thursday morning, the 9th of September, from a brain aneurysm that arrived without knocking while she stood at our stove. We'd been married 5 years. We were young enough that we honestly believed time was a thing we had plenty of. We thought we'd grow old together. We were wrong by about 50 years. There was no warning. There was no last conversation that either of us knew was the last. And the only mercy in the entire morning is that the sound I made when I found her, that sound is a sound Wren doesn't remember being old enough to understand. I hope she never does. I'll carry it for both of us. I want to tell you about that day honestly because I know how a story like this can go. People hear it, and they assume the ones who hurt me must have been monsters from the very start. Mine weren't, not exactly. And that, it turned out, was the hardest part to make peace with. The hospital released me around 2 in the afternoon with a folder of paperwork and a card for a grief counselor I never called because I couldn't work out which hour of which day a person is supposed to schedule the unraveling of their entire life. I sat in the parking deck for the better part of an hour. I watched a man 2 spaces overload groceries into the back of a minivan, and I felt a flash of pure animal envy at how ordinary his afternoon was. Then I started the car because Wren stirred, and a child waking up is a fact that doesn't care how much of you is already gone. My parents, Glenn and Maureen Halloran, lived in a tidy split level on a cul-de-sac down in Hendersonville, maybe 40 minutes south. My father was 56 then. retired early after a long career managing logistics for a freight company. My mother was 53 and did part-time bookkeeping for a dental office. They had 4 bedrooms, 2 of them empty since my younger brother Cole had moved out to Charlotte. I need to be precise about who they were because the easy version of this story turns them into cartoons and the true version is harder and worse. They were generous when it was convenient and they were scarce when it wasn't. They loved the way some people love, with an invisible ledger running quietly in the back room, the kind they'd have sworn under oath did not exist. I pulled into their driveway a little after 3:00. Wren was awake, quiet in that new, careful way. Posey was still asleep. I walked up and I knocked, and my mother stepped outside instead of in. I told her Delia was gone. I told her about the aneurysm, about the morning, about the lease running out in 17 days. And then I asked, and I want to be clear that I phrased it as a question because I needed her to understand it was a request and not an assumption, whether the girls and I could stay with them for a couple of weeks, just until I figured out what came next. My mother looked at the car, then back at me, then at the car again. "Marcus," she said, and folded that dish towel down one more time. "Your dad and I just aren't set up for this right now. We finally got into a rhythm, and 2 little ones at our age. Mom," it came out smaller than I felt it, "Delia died this morning." "I know, sweetheart. I know, and it's awful." She kept folding, "But we raised our kids already. We did our years. Your father's blood pressure, 3 weeks. 2. I just need a floor, and I'll sort out the rest." That's when my father appeared behind her in the doorway. He looked at me. He looked at my mother. He still did not look at the car. And when he finally spoke, it came with the particular cruelty of a man who is completely certain he's being reasonable. "It's not a good time, son. You're a grown man. You'll land on your feet." And then my mother added the line I have turned over in my head every day for 14 years. "We can't be the place you run to every time things get hard, Marcus. Every single time." As if there had been other times. As if the worst morning of my entire life were a bad habit. As if I'd made a career out of showing up on their porch with my hand out, when the truth is I had never asked them for anything before in my life. I stood on that step a beat longer than I should have. I'm not ashamed of it anymore, but it took me years to get there. I was waiting for one of them to look past me at those 2 small girls in the back seat and feel something larger than inconvenience, to change their mind. They didn't. And I need you to sit with that for just a second because it's the whole reason I'm telling you any of this. If you have ever stood in front of someone who was supposed to love you without conditions and watched them quietly do the math, watch their face arrive at the answer, no, then you already know that it doesn't feel like anger. It doesn't even feel like heartbreak, not at first. It feels like the floor tilting under you. It feels like a fact about the universe rearranging itself while you stand there holding your car keys. I felt the floor go on that porch and it never fully came back level. I walked back to the car. I buckled myself in with hands that didn't feel like mine. Wren asked where we were going. "Grandma and Grandpa Caraway's," I told her. She asked if they had horses. I said, "Yes." She accepted that the way 3-year-olds accept things, turned back to the window and went quiet. I pulled out of that cul-de-sac and pointed the car north toward the mountains, toward Delia's people. And I'll be honest with you about why I didn't call ahead. I was afraid the score was about to become 2 for 2. I had just watched one set of grandparents decide my children weren't worth the disruption. I did not have it in me to give the other set a chance to confirm it over the phone. So I just drove. An hour up winding 2-lane roads, the September light going long and gold over the ridgelines. Both girls asleep again by the time I turned onto the gravel that led up to the Caraway place. Hollis Caraway, Delia's father, was 60 then. He was coming out of the barn when my headlights swept across the yard, lean, weathered, the kind of man these mountains make after 40 years of working a hillside. He stopped. He looked at the car, and then before I had even gotten my door open, he was already walking toward me. I got out. I didn't know how to begin. He took one look at my face and said one word. "Marcus." The way you say a name when you already know everything that comes after it. "She's gone, Hollis," I said, and my voice cracked clean in half on her name. He crossed the last few feet and put his hand on the back of my neck, the way some fathers do, and he held it there. And he said nothing at all for a long moment. Then he pulled back, looked past me at the car, and said 4 words. "Get those babies inside." No conditions. No speech about routines or rhythms or what he and his wife had or hadn't signed up for at their age. Marguerite Caraway, Delia's mother, 58 years old, a woman who'd run cattle and kept a garden and made the best biscuits in the county for 30 years, had the back door of the car open before I'd even reached it. She unbuckled Posey, lifted her up against her shoulder, and looked at me over the baby's head with wet eyes and a jaw set hard as a fence post. The face of a woman who had decided to hold herself together because other people needed her to walk inside first. "You're going to eat something," she said. It was not a suggestion. I sat at their kitchen table that night and ate a bowl of beef stew I couldn't taste because grief flattens everything into a kind of gray static. But I ate it, because Marguerite had set it down in front of me, and eating it felt like the smallest possible way to honor what she was doing. Wren ate most of hers and asked if she could see the horses in the morning. Hollis told her she could name the new colt if she wanted. She thought about it with enormous seriousness and announced the colt's name should be Biscuit. Hollis wrote it down on a notepad and told her it was official now, binding, no appeals. They put the girls to bed that night in the room that had been Delia's growing up. Same quilt, same shelf of little horse figurines, same braided rug on the floor that Marguerite had made by hand one winter decades ago. I slept on a pullout in the front room under a stack of blankets with the hall light left on so Posey wouldn't wake up frightened in a strange house. I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't alone. And when you're 25 years old with 2 daughters and $41 to your name, not being alone is not a small thing. It is the entire world. I didn't know it that night, but I had just arrived at the foundation of everything that came after. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. 2 grieving little girls find a ranch and a new family. It's an easy thing to tell as something soft and warm. It wasn't soft. Every night for the first year I'd get the girls down to sleep, and then I'd sit out on the porch steps alone with a weight I would not wish on anyone. I missed Delia in the specific physical way you miss a person who was supposed to be there for the ordinary things, not the milestones, the Tuesdays, the school forms, and the bedtime negotiations, and the endless question of what's for dinner. What the Caraways gave me was not a replacement for any of that, and they never once tried to make it one. What they gave me was a structure to stand inside while I learned how to carry the weight, and the quiet daily message that I was worth showing up for. My own parents called twice in the first 6 months, my mother first, checking in with the guilty briskness of a person who knows she made the wrong call and hasn't quite admitted it to herself yet. My father second, asking whether I'd found a new place. Yet the question shaped so the real meaning sat right underneath it. When do you stop being a problem? I told him I was figuring it out. He said that was good. We hung up. I told you their hurt wasn't loud. It was a structural crack. You don't notice it the way you notice a fire. You notice it because the door doesn't close right anymore. Now let me tell you what I did with the years that followed. I had a degree in construction management and a head full of numbers, load, cost, margin, the math of things that have to hold up. I knew almost nothing about horses except that they were large and had strong opinions. So in those first weeks I told Hollis I wanted to earn my keep. Not as a thank you, but as a condition I set for myself. Because I came from ledger people and I couldn't fully shake it even when I wanted to. He put me out on the fence line along the north boundary, which needed resetting. Honest, physical work, the kind that keeps your hands busy while your mind does the harder thing. Wren took to mountain life with a speed that astonishes me to this day. Posey was too young to understand that anything had changed at all. To her, Marguerite was simply the warm arms that were always there. 3 years on in a year, I will never forget. Hollis sat me down at that same kitchen table one Sunday morning after the girls had gone out to the paddock with their grandmother. He spread a survey of the land out across the wood, all of it, the boundary lines, the soil grades, every acre. He told me he and Marguerite were getting older, that the place needed a plan, and that the plan, if I was willing, was this. He would begin transferring control of the operation to me now, with full ownership vesting over 10 years if I committed completely and brought my head for numbers to the business side of things. We're not giving it away, he said, because he believed sentiment was fine, but clear terms were better. You take on the note and the liability, but the land is yours to build on, and we'll be right here. I asked him why me, not falsely modest, actually asking. He looked at me the same way he had that first night in the headlights. Because Delia saw something in you, he said. Snorts. And because I've watched you for 3 years and you work hard and you tell the truth and you don't run from the hard thing. Then Dreyer, also your girl named that Colt Biscuit, and it stuck. And I figure anybody connected to that decision is committed to this place. I laughed. First real laugh in longer than I could measure. Okay, I said. Let's build something. Building something turned out to be a 14-year project, which makes complete sense because anything worth building takes longer than you plan. And there's always a stretch somewhere in the middle where you seriously wonder if you ruined your life by starting it. Mine came in the 7th year. By then, I'd redesigned the whole water system, added rainwater capture that cut our costs hard, grown the horse boarding from 6 stalls up to 20, and built a proper training arena on the far end of the property. The cattle herd had doubled, and quietly, carefully, I'd started breeding quarter horses for performance, for cutting and reining, the working horse events these mountains have always loved. When you know the bloodlines, and you have patience, that market can be extraordinary. Hollis had taught me the bloodlines, the patience I'd come by honestly. I didn't have a choice about that one. Then the drought hit. The hay market tripled in a single season. We lost cattle to the heat, and the bank called about our line of credit in a tone that was not a conversation. I was 32 years old, 2 girls, in elementary school, staring down a spreadsheet that told me I was 6 months from missing payroll. So I spread that spreadsheet out on the table, the very same way Hollis had spread the survey all those years before, and I told them both exactly where we stood. Hollis looked at the numbers. Marguerite looked at me. What do you need? He said. Time, I told him, and about $90,000 in bridge money to get through the season. He asked where I'd get it. I told him I had a plan, but I needed to know they were both okay with more risk before I made a move. Something passed between the two of them right then, something with no words in it at all. Then he looked back at me. We're in this together, he said. What's the plan? The plan was a 4-year-old stallion I'd been quietly developing, a horse with 2 reigning wins as a 3-year-old, and the bloodline and the movement to be a serious breeding prospect. I'd planned to wait until he had a longer record before I ever put him up. The drought changed the math. I hauled him to a regional sale myself, with Wren riding shotgun at 10 years old, holding a hand-lettered sign that just said go, which I made her keep down in the truck because I felt it might undercut the professional atmosphere of the sale barn. He sold for $310,000 to a buyer from a big operation 2 states over. We made payroll. We paid down the line. We survived. And I sat in that truck after the check cleared and I thought about what my father had said to me on that porch. You're a grown man. You'll land on your feet. He'd meant it as a door closing in my face. It had turned out by accident to be true. Over the years that followed, the place grew well past my own projections. The breeding program became the engine, producing horses that placed at the top circuits in the country. And a horse that places doesn't just win prize money. It builds a name, and a name multiplies stud fees and full values for years down the line. The land transferred fully to me right on schedule with the farmhouse reserved for Hollis and Marguerite for as long as they both lived. That part was always the arrangement. That part was never once in question. Hollis had slowed down by then. The knees and the back that 40 years of mountain work leave behind in a man. Marguerite was still sharp as fence wire. Wren, 16 by then, moved around those horses with a calm certainty that made me catch my breath, like she'd been born to it. Posey, 14, was quieter about it, but she tracked all our bloodline data with a precision that was honestly a little unsettling for her age. Delia would have loved this, I thought, more evenings than I could count. She'd have been insufferably proud of all of us. Then the offer came, A development group had been quietly buying up mountain properties for a luxury equestrian resort, the kind of project these hills near Asheville have become magnets for. It started as an informal phone call from a broker. It ended 4 months, and one very good attorney later with a number slid across a conference table that made the whole room feel like it was tilting. $12 million for the land, the improvements, the infrastructure, and the business assets with the Bloodline Archive licensed separately, so I could keep a smaller operation going if I chose to. And the farmhouse with the 2 acres around it was carved out of the deal entirely, an irrevocable reservation I had insisted on from the very first conversation. Hollis and Marguerite's home stayed theirs. That was not negotiable, and after I said it once, it never came up again. I signed in the spring. I was 39 years old. My parents found out the way most people did. A small business item in the regional paper that ran the sale figure and my name. My mother called that same afternoon. I let it ring. She left a voicemail warmer than anything she had left me in 14 years. The pride. We are so happy for you. We'd love to come to the celebration if you're having one. The celebration she had apparently already heard all about. I stood in the kitchen and listened to it twice. Then I called my attorney with a question about trust structures. And then I called Ren in and I told her what I was thinking about doing. She listened the way she always listens. Still, complete, the way her mother used to. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do Hollis and Marguerite know?" "Not the whole plan," I told her. "Not yet." "Are you going to tell them before?" "No," I said. "I want their reaction to be real." She thought about that. "Okay, a beat." "Dad, Grandma Maureen is going to make a face." "I know," I said. "I want to see it." "Me too. I'm not proud of that last part, but I'd be lying to you if I said it wasn't true. And if you've ever been dismissed by someone and then watched them want back in the moment you finally became a success, then you know the exact complicated thing I was feeling right then. It is not a clean feeling, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend that it was. The celebration was on a Saturday in late spring out on the ranch the last weekend before the buyer took possession, which meant the land was still mine for one final afternoon. 300 guests, a barbecue outfit from down the mountain, a small stage set up near the old arena. Hollis had wanted a tent in case of rain. I told him to trust the sky. He gave me the look of a man who has farmed these mountains for 4 decades and trusts the sky exactly as far as he can throw it. He was right, of course. There was a quick shower right around noon that cleared off by 2 Carrier and left everything smelling like cedar and whetstone, which is the best smell on this earth, and I will not be taking arguments on that today. My parents arrived early. My mother had her hair done and she wore a blouse I didn't recognize. My father had on his good boots. They walked in with the energy of people who had thought hard about this moment and decided to treat it as a homecoming. My brother Cole drove down from Charlotte with his wife. Cole and I had kept something honest between us over the years, if not exactly close. He hadn't been the one who turned me away that day, but he hadn't pushed back on the ones who did, either. And at some point, you have to make a kind of peace with that category of person, not the ones who shut the door, the ones who stood and watched it shut and decided the cost of saying something was just too high. I had mostly made that peace. He hugged me and he said he was proud of me, and I believed him. My parents found me near the stage about half an hour before the program started. My mother held the hug a beat longer than she usually did. My father shook my hand and said, "Son, what you built here." And there was something in his voice. I couldn't place it first. Then I did. It was pride. Real, unqualified pride. And here is the honest, complicated truth that landed even now, even after all of it. Because that is what fathers do when they finally say the thing you needed to hear. They say it years too late. And it still means something. And you're left standing there holding both of those truths at the same time with nowhere to set either one of them down. I told them I was glad they came. I meant it the way you mean. Things that are true, and also nowhere near enough. I did not tell them what was coming. The program started at 3:00. My attorney spoke first, laying out the business of the day, the history, the sale, the scope of it, precise and unhurried, the way good attorneys are. And then I walked up. 300 people, neighbors, horse people, auction, reps, magazine editors, the Carraway's whole church, the girls' friends, ranch hands who had worked beside us over the years, and Hollis and Marguerite sitting right there in the front row. He had his good hat on. She sat perfectly straight, with her hands folded in her lap the way she sits when she is working very hard not to show that she's nervous. They still didn't know. Good. I started with the land, what it taught me, what I'd put into it, what it had given back. I kept that part short because the people in that crowd already knew that story by heart. What they didn't know was what came next. Before we finalize anything here today, I said, I want to announce two things. Two things that matter a great deal more to me than any sale ever could. I nodded to my left, and a banner unrolled down from the stage, rigging 3 weeks of work with a design firm, clean and bold, and exactly right. The Delia Carraway Halloran Fund for Mountain Families. I heard Marguerite make a sound. I kept my eyes on that banner for a moment before I could trust my own voice. My late wife grew up on this land, I said. She loved it. She left it far too young, and she left behind 2 daughters and a husband who didn't know how to stand back up. This fund is endowed at $5 million out of the sale, and its purpose is to give emergency support to mountain families who lose the one person who held everything together. To be a bridge to something stable, because 14 years ago my family needed exactly that bridge, and the people who built it for us are sitting right there. I pointed at Hollis and Marguerite. The whole crowd turned to look, and I watched Hollis reach over and put his hand on top of Marguerite's. Hollis and Marguerite Carraway took in a 25-year-old widower and 2 toddlers on the worst night of his life. They didn't ask what we were going to cost them. They set 2 more plates at the table. They gave my daughters a home, and they gave me a reason to get up in the morning, and they asked for nothing in return. Not in 14 years, not once. A pause. I let it land. So the second thing is this. The farmhouse and the 2 acres around it, the parcel I carved out of the sale, is being transferred by deed to Hollis and Marguerite Carraway this week. Free, clear, theirs in perpetuity. Their home, always. And the crowd stood up, not politely. They stood the way people get to their feet when something moves them before they've even decided to. Hollis looked straight ahead, doing the thing men of his generation do when they're trying not to cry in public. Jaw set, slow blink, breathing through it. Marguerite was not even attempting that discipline. She was crying freely, openly, and I loved her for it. I found their eyes and held them. Thank you, I said into the microphone. It's not enough. It's just what I've got. Now, here is the part you came for, and I'm going to slow all the way down for it, because it earned its place. My parents were standing about 15 feet off to the left of the stage, and I could see them without ever looking directly at them. My mother's face had been on a long journey through that entire speech. She had walked into this event wearing the expression of a woman who fully expected to be welcomed into a success story, one she could stand adjacent to and quietly claim a small piece of. That expression had started to come apart during the part about September. It had buckled further during the part about 2 more plates being set. And it had gone somewhere I can only describe as a slow, controlled demolition during the part about the people who asked for nothing. Slow at first, then faster, and then a strange, settled kind of stillness at the very end that was not peace. It was the stillness of a person realizing in real time, in front of 300 witnesses, that the one thing they had refused to give was the single most valuable thing in that entire field, and that someone else had given it freely, asking for nothing, and that there was no way now to go back and choose differently. My father looked at the stage. Then he looked at Hollis and Marguerite receiving the warmth of that whole crowd. Then he looked at the banner with Delia's name on it. And then he looked at me, and I held his gaze for exactly as long as felt honest. Not 1 second of cruelty in it, not 1 second of triumph, just the truth passing between the 2 of us with nowhere left to hide. And then I looked back at the Carraways because they were the ones who deserved my eyes. If you have ever wanted someone to truly see what they did to you, not to suffer for it, just to finally fully see it, then you know that this moment is one of the rarest things in the entire world. You know that it almost never actually comes. And you know that when it does come, it doesn't feel anything like winning. It feels like setting something heavy down on the ground after carrying it so long you'd forgotten your arms were even full. And I want to be honest with you. If that had been me standing up there, if I had spent that whole speech watching the family I once turned away build a monument to the family who didn't, I don't know that I could have stayed standing still in that field. I think I would have. Wanted to leave, my parents didn't leave. I'll give them that much. They stayed and they took it. And staying took something out of them. When the applause finally settled, I stepped back up to the microphone one last time. Family, I said quietly into a crowd gone completely still, is not the people who share your name. It is the people who show up when showing up is the only thing that matters. The night my daughters and I arrived on this porch, nobody weighed whether we were going to be a burden. Somebody just opened the door. A beat. I have spent 14 years trying to deserve that. And then I stepped back. My mother found me near the food about 40 minutes later. I'd watched her circle from a distance, the whole time recalibrating. She started with, "That was a beautiful tribute to Delia. Thank you." A pause. "Marcus, I want you to know that your father and I think about that time. We think about what we should have done." "Mom," I said, keeping my voice level, "I'm not angry at you. I need you to understand that I mean that." And I did. The anger had burned all the way down over 14 years into something quieter and far more permanent. Not forgiveness exactly. Not bitterness exactly. Just clarity. "What you did back then told me something true," I said, "about what I could actually count on. And I built my whole life out of what I really had instead of out of what I wished I had. And it worked out." Her face was working at something. She tried once more, softer this time. "The girls," she said. "Could there be a way to know them better?" And here's the thing. It was the right question. 14 years too late and still the right one. "That's up to them," I said. "Ren is 16. Posey is 14. They have their own minds about what they want. If you want a relationship with them, you ask them directly, not me." She nodded twice. The nod of a person accepting terms they know they have no standing to negotiate. My father came over and stood beside her. Snorts. He looked at me. For a long moment, and then the words came, slow and deliberate. "I was wrong back then. What we did was wrong." 6 words, 14 years in the making. I let them sit there because they deserved to sit. "I know," I said. "I know you were." And that was enough. Not a reconciliation, not a repair, just an acknowledgement, witnessed by nobody but the two of us, that what happened was real, and that he finally knew it. And that mattered to me more than I'd ever expected it to. This whole story taught me something I had resisted my entire life because I came from ledger people. The mistake most people make is believing that love is a finite resource, something you have to ration out carefully, and that helping someone is a loan you're entitled to call back in later. My parents lived their whole lives inside that belief. They weren't cruel. They were just transactional. And when I showed up on their porch with nothing, they ran the numbers, and they decided I didn't pencil out. What Hollis and Marguerite understood, that nobody else in my life ever did, is that a person in need is simply that. A person in need. The only real question is, what do they need? And can I give it? And the debt, if there even is one, runs forward to the world, to be paid to the next person someday. That is a completely different way to live. And it turns out in the end to be the only way that actually builds a life worth having. So here's what I'd ask you to do today. If any of this landed on you at all, find the one person in your life who showed up for you when it cost them something and got nothing back for it, and tell them that you remember, not someday. This week. Most of us never say it because we just assume they already know. They don't always know. And here's the question I'd sit with. If I were you tonight, if someone you love showed up on your worst night with nothing to offer, but their need, would you run the numbers or would you just open the door? Be honest with yourself about the answer. The honest one is far more useful than the flattering one. Now I genuinely want to hear from you. And I do read these. Comment, A1 if you think I handled my parents the right way, leaving that door open just an inch and nothing more. Comment a 2 if you would have shut it completely. And comment a 3 if you'd have done the thing I couldn't quite do and let them all the way back in. There's no wrong answer here. I just want to know how your heart works. And tell me where in the world are you listening to this from? And what time is it where you are right now? I really do love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you have ever stood on a porch like mine on either side of that door, then tell me about it. Down below, somebody else scrolling tonight needs to know that they are not the only one. If this story moved you at all, do me one small kindness and subs, and I would love for you to stay for the next one. It means more than you know that you stayed all the way here to the end with me. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Asheville, North Carolina to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.